Good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here and to thank you for joining us and joining NYU School of Law in this tribute to Marian Wright Edelman. As you all know, each year the NYU Annual Survey of American Law dedicates its forthcoming issue to someone who has made a significant contribution to the legal field, which is dramatically understating the impact that Ms. Edelman has had. We have had over the years the privilege of honoring distinguished judges, including Supreme Court justices and Court of Appeals judges as well as leading academics and practitioners. And I am just delighted that our students on the NYU Annual Survey of American Law have chosen to dedicate their 76th volume to Ms. Edelman, the founder and president emerita of the Children's Defense Fund. She will be formally introduced in just a moment, but let me say, on behalf of the faculty and administration of the school, how thrilled we are to have you here, and that you've allowed us to celebrate you in this way. Now I want to introduce the editor-in-chief of the annual survey, Catherine Morris. Prior to joining NYU Law, Catherine spent 6 years in public service. She began her career as a public affairs specialist for the Department of Veterans Affairs, later joined the FBI as a paralegal. And during law school, she has interned at several municipal, state, and federal agencies in healthcare and law enforcement, and after graduation, she will return to public service as an attorney for the Army Corps of Engineers. Catherine.
What is the worth of a child? Imagine a world where children are not valued, where we do not put their needs and desires before our own. Imagine a world where we do not invest in their future, where we do not make sacrifices to ensure their health, happiness, and spiritual well-being. What is the worth of a child? Not so long ago, the worth of a child was measured by the value of her labor. On our farms, children were responsible for household chores so that men could go and work in the fields. Industrialization created a special need for child labor in our factories and our textile mills because their small hands were perfectly equipped to work among the dangerous machinery. For the working class family, a child was a vital source of income. She was the secondary wage earner to her father because her mother's place was still in the home. The American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals predated any organization devoted to the protection of children. Early advocates for the rights of children had to confront a society that did not recognize their worth beyond the value of their labor. In our cities, automobiles and streetcars soon replaced horse-drawn carriages. The streets, once the playgrounds of our children, became the scene of public tragedy. In the 1920s, 60% of all vehicle-related deaths were children under the age of 9. On May Day in 1926, the nation mourned the 7,000 children killed in the previous year alone. What is the worth of a child? In wrongful death suits, our courts held that the life of a slain child was valued at the lost labor and wages to her parents. For children too young to work, there was no compensation for their grieving parents because there was no economic value to their lives. For the working class family who relied on the earnings of their children, insurance companies offered life policies specifically for them. But advocates argued that such policies were the continued exploitation of children, even in death. They warned that allowing parents to bet on their child's mortality could lead to abuse and neglect. But for some, the economic need was real. The payout on a child's life policy determined whether the child would receive a Christian burial or a pauper's grave. Early state legislation regulated child labor to provide working children a minimum education, but it did not exclude them from the labor market. It was not until 1938, with the Fair Labor Standards Act, the child advocates bounded over the first hurdle towards human rights. But with this federal law, we had not defined the new name or the new worth of a child. It was no longer the value of her labor. Instead, her worth was now the sentimental value to her family. In wrongful death suits, juries began to award significant damages. This was in part to acknowledge that no amount can ever really make parents whole again after the loss of their child. But should the worth of a child be her sentimental value? Should she be a symbol of youth and innocence to society? An object of parental affection to be coddled and adored? What becomes the value of a child who is forgotten, neglected, and seemingly unloved? Marian Wright Edelman is one of the great child rights advocates of our time. The worth of a child does not come from the value of her labor, nor from the affection and love of her family. Her worth comes from within. It is her dignity, her spirit, that gives her value. Mrs. Edelman, you have always seen the worth in every child. You have fought for their rights. Because of you, there are children who are free from hunger and homelessness. Because of you, there are children that have access to health care, who have a foundation to be successful in the classroom, and who feel safe, supported, and loved in their homes and in their communities. Mrs. Edelman, through the Children's Defense Fund, you have provided us with a model of excellence. Through your organization's policies and lobbying, you have created a path for us to follow and to continue the advocacy for children's rights. We cannot imagine a world where children are not valued. We cannot imagine a world where we do not invest in their future. Mrs. Edelman, thank you for showing us and helping us to see their dignity, their spirit, and their worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So for those who haven't been to one of these dedication ceremonies before, the model here is that rather than hearing from the dedicatee at the beginning, we will do that at the very end. And in the meantime, we will hear from colleagues and friends of hers who've known and worked with her over the years. And we have just a terrific slate of speakers to speak in tribute to Ms. Edelman here this evening. The first of whom, if ever there was a person in a place who required no introduction, it would be John Sexton. Can it be that there's a person within a mile of here who doesn't know who John Sexton is? I don't think so. But he is, among many things, the Benjamin Butler Professor of Law here at the law school, and of course, Dean Emeritus and President Emeritus. He has been a critical part of NYU since 1981. I proudly count myself as one of the many FSOJ, friends of John, as do many of us in this room, and we're thrilled to have John with us tonight. Professor Sexton.
If you think about it for a moment, this is a quite extraordinary monument to an extraordinary person. What happens with the dedication of the annual survey is that a talented group of students dedicate an entire year's work of the collective to the person that's honored. So the entire volume of this year's annual survey, which was something that was created by Arthur Vanderbilt, whose portrait is behind me and for whom this building is named, the Annual Survey of American Law, which around the world for decades has been kind of a window into American law for those that know little about it. And this group of dozens of students have the right each year to choose a single person to whom they will dedicate the entire year's work. And Marian, that's you. That's pretty cool. For most of the people in the room and for the most of the people who know me, there is one person that doesn't need introduction, and that is the most remarkable person I ever met, whose name was Lisa. When Lisa and I graduated together from law school in 1979, it was impossible to be a law student or young lawyer, at least one who cared about the world, without knowing that one of the heroes of the law was Marian Wright Edelman. That was 1979. That's nearly, well, that's a long time ago. That's 50 years ago. In 1980, our first year, is it 40? It's a long time ago. In 1980, which was our first year in DC, the Children's Defense Fund was already admired as the quintessential public interest organization working in this important area that Catherine so eloquently highlighted. And Marion's work was legendary. Interestingly, though, Lisa and I spent 2 years in DC, and we had all kinds of mutual connections. To the best of my memory, we never met, and we certainly never forged a friendship during those 2 years. Marion entered our lives as a friend, and this will very much be from that angle, not the professor, not the dean, not the president. She entered our lives as a friend a year after we had settled in New York. Lisa at the Charles Revson Foundation and I at NYU. I remember distinctly the night when Lisa at dinner first raised Marion's name, not as an icon, but as someone with whom she proposed to work. And she described the work at the CDF that she was hoping to support from the foundation. Suddenly that evening, through her magical words, the hero whom we had admired became a person. And there was an excitement in her voice about the possibilities of that partnership, an excitement that, of course, has been vindicated in the record of the following decades, 4 decades, as it turns out, that we honored tonight. At the time, Hillary Clinton was the chair of the Children's Defense Fund. So it came to be that these 3 magnificent women forged a friendship, and in many respects, a partnership. Eventually, the 3 husbands were added to the circle, and that is how Marion, the person, entered my life. So it was, as with so many of the very best things in my life, my friendship with this very special person was as a result of Lisa. Today, there are many. There's a very distinguished list of people here, both as colleagues and friends, come here today, and they'll speak about Marion's extraordinary professional accomplishments. And in a moment, I'll highlight a couple myself. But I want to begin, however, by telling you a more private story. Don't know that it's been told. It hasn't been told by me. But one that illustrates what, as I thought about this evening, seemed to me to be a foundational trait in Marion's continued success. Early on, I think it was the summer of 1983 or 1984, the 3 women conceived of gathering a dozen or so people together in a relaxed setting where we would all be together around the clock. It was a kind of form of an intellectual retreat. They decided, I strike the we, they decided that we would discuss certain big topics, and we would all do a set of common readings of various books that they selected in advance. There was ample time for social activities and sidebar conversations. I remember many of them very vividly, but there was also designated time where we would all gather for a serious amount of time each day for conversations, development of strategies, and so forth. The husbands were invited to participate. This was the first time I met Peter, Marion's husband. We repeated these, I'll call them retreats, for a few years. What I found extraordinary about those summer days is something that I think always has been reflected in Marion's work. The importance, even as one deals with immediate challenges, of concentrating on how these immediate challenges and even intermediate steps can be shaped in an arc that serves long-term goals. This capacity to operate effectively on several levels simultaneously, within the context especially of a complex organization with pressing immediate needs, with the crisis du jour that always has to be handled, is a trait that I saw in those years and have seen in the years since in Marian Wright Edelman. Many will speak of her achievements in expanding a child's primary education, healthcare, and other needs. But I believe her singular success on those fronts is a product of her capacity to think and act in this multidimensional way. In my written submission, I mention just a few examples how one can see in the Handicapped Children Act of 1975 the kind of arc of development, kind of like Thurgood Marshall building the case for Brown, or Ruth Ginsburg building the case for Roe versus Wade. This was that kind of litigation strategy brought to political advocacy. And you can see in that 1975 Act the later work that shows up in children's health care in the 90s and even into this century. From 1975 through the present, and that's just one example, Marian has forced the country to change its way of thinking by bringing the easy case, or relatively easy case first. None of them have been easy, but then building on that precedent a political momentum that leads to grand strategic success when viewed back through the lens of 40 years. I'm going to skip the other specific examples, but I just want to say this, because it's another angle that perhaps I uniquely can bring to this, perhaps even to Marian's surprise. And it connects to my apology that I'm speaking first, not because of any importance or closeness, but because my legendary, at least in my mind, course, Baseball as a Road to God, is taught on Tuesday nights, and I must get to my students at some point before class begins shortly after 6:30. But I'm going to connect, believe it or not, Marian to Baseball as a Road to God, showing a rarely seen dexterity in rhetoric. So since Lisa's death, and this is in the written version, since Lisa's death, I've followed Marian's career more from a distance, but always with admiration. I never hear her name, however, without experiencing a flood of warm memories of how this woman, already a model for anyone associated with the law and public advocacy, took seriously first a junior woman and then her husband, and included us in the grand dream. There have been poignant intersections other than my just hearing her name, however, one of which connects to Baseball as a Road to God. As part of the course each year, on extra time, not class time, because I think every minute of class time is precious, and I would never show a movie in class. This is lazy teaching. But I do, as I will tonight in teaching The Natural, offer the students the movie The Natural and a meal afterwards. And when we work our way through the religious texts like Otto and Eliot and the great baseball novels like The Natural and The Celebrant and the Universal Baseball Association, and we get to that moment in the course where the hypothesis that baseball could be a religion for some requires us to move to history and the story of New York on October the 4th, 1955. One of the 12 greatest days in the history of humanity. Okay, the day and the only day that the legitimate Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers, will win the World Series. They will stay after class to watch a magnificent HBO documentary called The Brooklyn Dodgers, The Ghosts of Flatbush. I have told over the decades on 6 different continents the story of how that day, a crucifix released by my best friend Dougie's hand broke the tooth here that for years I carried as a mark of that wonderful and sacred day. I have never told the story of that day as well as it was told in that film. And the man who produced that film was Ezra Edelman, Marion's son. And he got access to me to tell that story because he was Marion's son. And he did a better job at it than I ever have. Having that story memorialized in the film was a real treat. But a greater treat was the considerable time off camera spent with Ezra talking about his mother. We all should be so lucky as to be loved by our children the way she is loved by him. My daughter Katie, with whom I share such love, today is a legal aid lawyer working with children. I directly connect that to the subliminal influence through her mother of Marion Wright Edelman at our dinner table, though physically not present, always present in stories. Perhaps Marion's greatest long-term legacy is that there are thousands of Katies out there, always thinking farther down the road. So I close by saying, as Lisa would want me to say, that I've observed Marion from many angles. Yes, I've seen her as the hero of the law that we celebrate today. I've also seen her as a friend, a mentor, a wife, and a mother. To those who are privileged to know her in all those roles, no amount of celebration is enough. To friends, family, colleagues, and children around the world, Marion is and has been nothing short of a constant blessing. I'm so happy to see you made part of NYU in this way, and I congratulate the students on their choice.
Thank you, John. And now I am delighted to introduce Elaine Jones. Ms. Jones served as president and director counsel of the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund from 1993 to 2004. She was the first woman to hold those positions. She spent her career at the LDF after graduating from the University of Virginia Law School in 1970 as the law school's first black female graduate. Under her leadership, LDF obtained many significant landmark legal victories, and throughout the course of her career, she has been awarded many honors, including 13 honorary degrees, as well as the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award presented in 2000 by President Clinton. We are thrilled to have her here with us this evening. Elaine Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone. Evening, I guess I should say. This is truly a wonderful occasion, and I am glad that that all of us were able to get here. And I was able to make it to New York from Washington, but lift to NYU Law was not quite as easy to do. Let me see my thoughts. All of us are pleased to assemble this evening to recognize the past, present, and continuing work of Marion Wright Edelman, because she is by no means finished. And she has spent decades molding our institutions, economic, social, political, educational, to recognize, serve, and promote and protect the interests of the least of these. The least of these, those who are most vulnerable, those who are in greatest need, those who should have the highest call on our collective conscience. Now, preeminent among these I'm describing are our children, for whom we are still not doing nearly enough. It is better than it has been, due principally to CDF's work. And as poet Robert Frost reminds us, we have miles to go before we sleep. Now, I also must take a moment to applaud the editorial board of the NYU Annual Survey of American Law, because you deserve it, under the leadership of your editor-in-chief, Catherine Morris, for choosing extraordinarily well and dedicating this 76th volume to tonight's honoree. What I find amazing is how the annual survey persuaded the humble, erudite, hardworking, quote, MWE, close quote, as she is often lovingly and respectfully referred to behind her back, to allow us to pause for a well-deserved moment of recognition for her extraordinary achievements. Now, I am one who understands the absolute necessity of fundraising to support a nonprofit. And I could comprehend this a bit better if I were this a fundraiser for CDF, or giving a scholarship to a worthy child, or to finance a weekend to inspire and mold children and young adults at Haley Farm, or even to help finance a summit or conference on some aspect of the elimination of poverty. This evening, however, is a tribute to the force of nature, who has been trying to teach us for decades how to love all our children. Now, my experience also with MWE is that personal recognition is not her cup of tea. However, for a worthy cause, she will endure. Show up, be pleasant, and enjoy it. But upon reflection, we must remember that Marion is an activist. However, she is also an author and a scholar. And through it all, she has demonstrated an appreciation for a life of letters, for writing, reflection, chronicling, teaching, and inspiring through the printed word. With her gifts of insight and strategic vision, she would understand, value, and be honored by the gift of this 76th volume to inform and inspire generations to come. Therefore, tonight we thank you, the annual survey, for conceiving this 76th volume and for persuading Marion to bear with us as we express our gratitude for using her extraordinary gifts to move us inch by inexorable inch to a realization of her vision. Now, there are others who will spend their time tonight talking about CDF, those who work there, who understand it, who know it. That is really not my place. But I want to spend an additional few minutes thinking about Marion in a pre-CDF period. For as odd as it may seem, there was such a time. Now, to be frank, in hindsight, I can see that even during that pre-CDF period, the idea of CDF was planted and nurtured. Jack Greenberg, the head of the NAACP, LDF, from 61 to 84, had the uncanny ability, as did his predecessor, Thurgood Marshall, to find, fund, and otherwise support talented students and young lawyers. Jack's goal was to identify promising young graduates whose goal was simply to serve and to find a place where they could fight for racial justice and equality. As the new director counsel of LDF in '61, Jack had to scramble and find some money. And he found some fellowship funds, so he could only fund 2 fellowships, 2 interns. And he funded Marian Wright, then a recent graduate, 1963, from Yale Law School, and Julius Chambers, the first African-American graduate of University of North Carolina School of Law and LDF's 3rd Director Counsel. Upon graduation from law school, when Marian received that LDF fellowship, after a year in New York, she was whisked off to Mississippi. And I can't say she became one of 4 black lawyers in Mississippi because Marian was not then a member of the bar. And there were 3 gentlemen, one of whom in his 80s, and 2 others who were in Mississippi. That was the Mississippi bar. And Marian passed the bar the next year in 1965, but during that 1964 year, that Freedom Summer year, she opened an office in a pool hall on Farris Street in Jackson, Mississippi, and clerked for the 3 black lawyers who were located downstairs. And so everything that Marian wrote, they filed. Now, and they also signed everything she wrote. So they get credit for it in terms of the historical record. So when Marian then became a member of the Mississippi Bar the following year, she was the first African-American woman admitted. Now, I know her bar exam had to have been perfect. Because if Mississippi could have found any pretext, they would have found it. Now, I know this personally because I brought too many lawsuits against bar examiners in the early 70s across this country, especially in the South, Alabama, South Carolina, across the country, for messing around with the bar exams of African-American students. And I would see COL beside the name when we filed a lawsuit, and I asked in deposition one bar examiner, I said, what is COL? They told me colonel. I said, oh, so everybody was a colonel. Everybody black was a colonel. All right, so Marian passed that bar exam. So that shows that she was valedictorian from Spelman, and, you know, she did well. So she's always done well. So, but here is what's interesting. Judge Connie Motley was the first woman of color to try a case in Mississippi, but she was not a member of the Mississippi Bar. She didn't have to be. She came out of New York and went down there and tried the case and went on back. Marian was a different kettle of fish. She was living in Mississippi. Mississippi was home, and she was there for 4 years. Now, Marian had 3 law students who joined her once, you know, before the bar and after, who joined her in her office, one of whom was Danny Parker, now a senior judge on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And so he learned a great deal from Marian, and I have not yet deposed him on exactly what all of that was, but that time will come. Now, the Jackson, Mississippi office, with Marian at its head, with assistance from LDF National Office and Northern Volunteers, handled more than 120 cases arising out of Freedom Summer, because that was Freedom Summer. Some of which involved lots of defendants. She had school desegregation cases, peaceful protest cases, criminal justice cases, welfare and municipal service cases, employment discrimination cases, and cases seeking public accommodations, particularly against most of the Dairy Queens in Mississippi, who strangely proved to be fairly intransigent when it came to desegregating its facilities. Now, that 4-year stint, CDF incubated in Maryland because she learned that lawsuits alone will not eliminate disparity, different unequal treatment, and segregation. When she became involved in bringing Head Start to Mississippi during that period, she knew then that the community and political action are needed in the struggle. So Mary was down there during some of the most turbulent years in Mississippi, giving it her all. When in 1967, she and Peter Edelman laid eyes on one another, when he, as assistant to Robert Kennedy, showed up. In a year, Mississippi was in the rearview mirror, for Marion was back in D.C. marrying Peter the following year, but she didn't give up the struggle. She stayed with the struggle. Now, this year, they've been together for 51 years, Marion and Peter, so now I want to read that book. She's written several, but that one I have not yet seen, and I'm waiting for it. Now, after beginning the Washington Research Project, she represented Dr. Martin Luther King in the Poor People's Campaign. Now, here she is 4 years later, 1972. I am a young lawyer at the Legal Defense Fund. Marion comes in to meet with the board of directors. She's standing in front of the board, explaining her vision, raise this new institution devoted to molding children into wholesome, responsible adults. The reaction was interesting. They listened. They were intrigued. I wouldn't say enthusiastic, but they heard it. I was mesmerized. I think I was the youngest person in the room. But from that person on, from that time on, listening to her passion and her commitment and seeing that vision, she has been a hero of mine from that day to this. Now that has been 47 years. And I continue to learn from Marion, her conferences, her seminars, her work at CDF. She deserves all the honors we can give her. I mean, you know, one has more than 100 honorary doctorates. I guess that's easier than having to write dissertations. So, you know, there you only give a speech for the honorary doctorate, but we give her credit. You know, she got more than 100, and they keep coming. Got one last year, got one year before. And so, you know, and all of the awards she has earned, she deserves. And what comes to mind is lives of great men and women, paraphrasing, all remind us we can make our lives sublime and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing o'er like Salome, a forlorn or shipwrecked brother or sister, seeing, shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for anything, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. Marion has big feet, and she continues to give us big footprints. And it's going to be very, very difficult to fill them, but all we can do is do our very best. Congratulations, my friend.
Wow, thank you. I now have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, James Weil. He is currently the president of the Food and Action Research Center, and previously he served as program director and general counsel at CDF. His accomplishments at CDF include spearheading the first major expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit, as well as the passage of the Children's Health Insurance Program, and he led CDF's Medicaid expansion, child care, and child support enforcement reform efforts. Mr. Weil.
Well, I was going to start by saying I'm hugely honored to have been asked to participate in this tribute today to Marion, and that's true, but I wasn't aware that I was going to be following John Sexton and Elaine Jones. So while I'm honored to be in this distinguished group of speakers, I'm also somewhat abashed. But the annual survey has made a wonderful choice in Marion, and we have many things to say about her. I'm going to focus on three aspects of Marion's leadership tonight. First is her pioneering of essentially a new area of social justice advocacy work. Second is her grounding of that work in her profound interest in and knowledge of American history, and particularly the history of resistance. And third is Marion's ability to adjust her strategies to keep the work fresh and relevant and to adapt to a rapidly changing American society. So I'm going to start with Marion's role as the pioneer of a new area of social justice work. It would be an overstatement to say that Marion invented child advocacy in the US, and she would be the first to get up and yell at me for saying that and object, and she would call out the names of many forebears, many of them unheralded, many of them women, many of them people of color. But when Marion launched the Children's Defense Fund, there was no entity like the one she set out to create. A multifaceted advocacy organization committed to building the rights of and supports for children and their families, not just through litigation, but through research, lobbying, regulatory advocacy, network building, organizing, and consistent and moral leadership. Its work would span the spectrum from the most aspirational to the most granular interventions on behalf of children. And not just its strategies have been multifaceted, so have been its concerns. It has addressed a robust range of issues central to children's lives. And the genius in the creation and the genius of all this was recognizing the size and shape of the vacuum of advocacy for children in this country, and that American politics and jurisprudence needed and would have to respond to a forceful presence to fill that vacuum. And the genius in the creation of CDF came as well in the insight that meeting children's needs would be an important tool also for addressing the related harms of racism and poverty in this society. As Marion herself said, I had got the idea that children might be a very effective means for broadening the base for change. The weaving together of those strands of meeting children's needs, promoting racial equity, and pursuing aggressive anti-poverty advocacy created the fabric that has made CDF unique and Marion a clarion voice for justice for close to 50 years. Second, Marion's vision for this effort also has always been intimately connected to her knowledge of the history of American social change movements. To work with Marion, and you can see and hear this in her speeches and her books and her writings, as well as her day-to-day conversation. To work with Marion was to have an immersion course in the history of oppression and resistance to it that should define how one should act in this unjust society. It's no accident that Marion wears pendants with pictures of Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. And the history that she tells has continuity, goes way back, but it continues into our lifetimes as well. Like her commitment to describing for her younger, more naive, less experienced staff the experiences that Elaine was talking about, particularly describing the courage of the women from the African American community in Mississippi who built the voter registration campaigns and the Head Start programs. Marion knows this history, she honors it, she integrates it into her thinking and work and the thinking and work of the people around her, and she makes it real for Americans, for the rest of us. She uses the history of these struggles for social justice as a source of inspiration and resilience for herself and for those around her. The third attribute of Marion that I want to point to is her foresight and ability and willingness to adjust her goals and methods. The story of CDF is a story of change, not just in the sense of the purpose of being an effective agent of social change, but in the sense of the organization going through its own evolutions and revolutions. Its mission always remained the same, and Marion never deviated an inch from the focused pursuit of that mission. But its strategies evolved as, for better and worse, the America around it changed. For children, for women, poor people, people of color, and for lawyers and advocates. This coming June will be 50 years since I graduated from this law school. It was also June 1969 when Warren Burger replaced Earl Warren as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, one key starting point for the long-term erosion of litigation as a tool for enforcing rights and pursuing equality in this country. The erosion is not what those of us who grew up and learned our history in the 50s and 60s, it's not what those of us who had been inspired by cases like Brown v. Board, In re Galt, Reynolds v. Sims, Goldberg v. Kelly. It's not what we foresaw. I'm not up here to whine, although it's very tempting. But my point is that Marion always has carved out new paths, rethinking the strategy and keeping CDF and the movement flexible. When the progressive advocacy, within the progressive advocacy community as a whole, Marion's adaptations and vision of how to proceed typically were ahead of and served as models for other groups. Even in 1973, the year that CDF was launched, some of the handwriting was on the wall, particularly, for example, in San Antonio Independent School District v. Rodriguez, when the Supreme Court largely eviscerated the ability to use the courts and the Constitution as a means to achieve educational equity and quality. Throughout the 70s and 80s, while CDF kept litigating, it grew its toolkit of strategies, growing its research capacity, its lobbying capacity, its budget analysis, and particularly its state and local presence. And these changes since have been complemented by a huge field capacity, including recently a special focus on organizing among youth of color, ministers, and religious congregations. So I see these three qualities: an extraordinary conceptual breakthrough at the beginning, a deep connection to history and its meaning for the work, and the unusual adaptability to new circumstances, combined with Marion's force of personality and commitment to moral leadership, as the elements that have made her a leader, not just among Americans, but around the world. around the world. For several years during the Clinton administration, Marion was the head of the U.S. delegation to the UNICEF Executive Board, in effect the U.S. ambassador to UNICEF. I saw there how child advocates and government officials from around the world reacted with awe and with deference to meeting her and listening to her. This was not, unfortunately, because the U.S. was so advanced in its recognition of children's rights. Very often we lag behind other countries. It was because they felt that Marion had created a path that was important everywhere, that she inspired their efforts, and that she embodied their aspirations and the qualities they wanted to bring to the work. And she is indeed a force, a unique leader of a compelling cause for our times that must engage us all. And that's why we honor her today.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Olivia Golden. Ms. Golden is the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Social Policy. She has spent her career in service to children and families. She's held public service posts, leading the DC Children and Family Services Agency, and was Commissioner for Children, Youth, and Families, and later the Assistant Secretary for Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We are thrilled that she's with us this evening.
Good evening. It's an honor, as Jim said, daunting, but an honor to be with this extraordinary group of people to honor Marion Wright Edelman. Marion was the first boss that I had when I moved to Washington, D.C. In 1991, more than 25 years ago. I've thought of her and what I learned from her in those 2 years I worked for her so many times in the years in between. But especially in these last 2 years, since the election of 2016, a time that has demanded strength, clarity, strategy, and passion beyond what I think any of us believed we had to offer, and Marion's been my gold standard in that time. I do want to note what many people here probably already know, that I'm just one of a very large number of people who came to Marian early in their careers and soaked up what she had to teach. From the beginning, she's left an extraordinary legacy of younger leaders. From the CDF staff and board, her alums include, as you've already heard, Hillary Clinton, Maggie Williams, along with Jeffrey Canada and Angela Glover Blackwell, who I met when they were young rising stars on the CDF board, as well as people who may be less famous in the nation as a whole, but who are essential in the day-to-day advocacy work in Washington, D.C. People like Debbie Weinstein, the longtime leader of the Coalition for Human Needs, Cliff Johnston, who created a child and family focus at the National League of Cities, Arlok Sherman, a brilliant numbers and creative advocate at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. So if you think about all of us in this CDF diaspora, what did we learn from Marian? 3 themes kept coming to me as I thought about these remarks. First of all, Marian taught us all to hold on stubbornly to our core values and instincts. That came through in what you heard from Elaine, that she taught by example and sometimes by words that we should never allow others to define for us our work, our mission in life, or the core values we hold. She often quoted a phrase which she attributed to her childhood, assign yourself, meaning that each of us holds the responsibility to figure out what the work is that we're meant to do. One of my most vivid CDF memories, Marian, is a story told to me by Paul Smith, the late Paul Smith, who was our beloved research and data guru and who had been with Marian for years, and he served sort of as a guide to many of us newcomers to her. And he said to me once, you always have to remember that deep inside Marian is the young woman standing up to a sheriff in a small southern town. That story was about Marian's courage, it was about her defiance, it was about a good kind of stubbornness, of building a line because you knew in your own core being that it divided right from wrong. And of course, that was a story that taught me a lot about Marian, but as I've thought about it, it also captured something she was teaching us about ourselves, that each of us needs to find and define that stubborn core. In these last 2 years of the Trump administration, that lesson has been constantly in my mind. A second lesson that all of us at CDF, of course, absorbed, and Jim has touched on this, was Marian's big project, placing child advocacy at the center of a racial and economic justice agenda. She placed children at the center for 2 reasons. Because of who they are, their vulnerability, the moral demand that we pay attention to them, and also because sympathy for children offers a way of engaging the broader public in caring about children's families and communities. CDF's goal was that people's moral and emotional reaction to the suffering of children would help bridge racial and class divides and lead to solutions. So in keeping with this aim, Marian always viewed children in the context of their parents, their families, and their communities. She and CDF have been a model to the rest of the child advocacy world, which is a world that can sometimes blur parents almost out of the picture or look for solutions that bypass them. I remember when I was at CDF how valuable, for example, I found the reports we did on young parents, which showed that young children's poverty arises in part from the inadequate earnings of young adults. The good news is that I learned that lesson. It stuck with me after I left, and in our work at the Center for Law and Social Policy, we've been analyzing the census data for each of the last few years to look at poverty among young adults with children in particular. But the bad news is that the grim result remains true today. Our analysis of the most recent Census Bureau poverty data showed that fully 1 in 5 young adult parents under age 30 lives in poverty. So the persistence of this and other grim news about children and about their parents, which others have alluded to, does raise a question about the effectiveness of centering advocacy on children. Does the bad news undermine this powerful and extraordinary and influential insight about child advocacy as a driver for change? It can be easy to give up hope, especially now when attacks on children, particularly children in immigrant families and children of color, are so widespread and hate-filled. But I know it won't surprise Marion, who knows I'm an optimist, that I remain convinced that advocacy for children and their families is a critical thread, a critical lever for reform. For one thing, despite the disappointments, there have been important successes. Even in these past 2 years, successes where children's experiences have powerfully moved people in politics, perhaps most dramatically recently in the outcry against the separation of children from their parents at the border. For another thing, the moral urgency of advocacy for children remains. Children are the poorest Americans. Children's dire circumstances continue to call on us to persist in fixing the damage. And finally, no single strategy for reform of policy and of law has ever been sufficient in itself, so that's the wrong standard for success. Marion's core insight about the power of advocating for children doesn't transform the nation all by itself, but that was never a reasonable expectation. It remains indispensable many, many decades after her initial framing. But in these last few months of political turmoil, I've thought most of all about a third lesson that Marion taught me: her commitment to both long-term vision and immediate, call it incremental change. In my first few months at CDF, which were also my first months in Washington, D.C., I remember feeling honored and awed when Marion invited me as a staff person to come to a dinner that she was hosting at her home for important thought leaders, heads of organizations, lots of important people in Washington, D.C. At the end of the evening, I was a lot less awed by all those important thought leaders, and I was a lot less awed by Washington, but I was more awed by Marion. And the reason was that I felt truly grateful to work for someone whose vision was not bounded by what was possible in the current Congress. It's that sense of history that Jim talked about, her sense of the sweep of American history telling her that the limits that seem like iron today may crumble tomorrow. But at the same time, Marion never believed in holding off on doing good today in favor of perfection 10 years from now. An old friend of mine who worked with Marion many years ago once told me a story that resonated with my own experiences. She said there was some complicated legislative situation. She went to Marion. She said, "Should I take this compromise?" And Marion said, "If it's good for children, you should take it." So at a moment when so much commentary, so much political opinion tries to pit big picture and visionary reforms, long-term reforms, against so-called incremental improvements, it is especially important to hold on to this both-and framing. We should not delay improving people's lives right now when we have a chance, and we shouldn't hold back from the grand sweep of change over the longer haul. That lesson, among so many others, is one that I owe to Marion. I don't actually know if the United States will come out of this perilous time we're in now with our democracy intact and with the enormous public energy for change successfully channeled to tear down the barriers of poverty and injustice. But if we do, that success will owe a great deal to Marion's legacy, due at least in part to her inspiration, to the leaders she has guided, and to the wisdom she has offered to us all. Thank you so much, Marion.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce Robert Schwartz. He is the co-founder and Executive Director Emeritus of the Juvenile Law Center, an organization that advocates for the rights of children in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. He co-founded the JLC in 1975 and went on to serve as its Executive Director from 1982 to 2015. He's also the Beck Chair of Law at the Beasley School of Law at Temple University. He spent his career defending the rights of Pennsylvania children at the JLC, as well as advocating for institutional and policy reform at both the national and international levels, and we are very grateful he's here with us today. Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Dean. And as others have said before me, it is indeed an honor for me to join friends and colleagues who I've admired for so long. I shouldn't say for so long, because it's a reminder of how long we've been doing this. But Marion has taught and inspired me and countless colleagues, many of whom have passed through NYU's doors. It is fitting indeed that we celebrate Marion at this law school with its unparalleled history of advocating for the rights and well-being of children and families. When I was young, before so many of us turned gray, I was, as the dean said, part of a team that founded Juvenile Law Center. That was 1975. We were influenced by a one-year-old bright yellow paperback edition of the Harvard Educational Review. That volume on the rights of children was breathtaking. There were articles by Walter Mondale, Hillary Rodham, Peter Edelman, Mary Jo Bain, and a dozen other luminaries. The article that bewitched me most as I took my first toddling steps as a lawyer was an interview with Marion. The opening question to her was, "You recently announced the formation of a new organization, the Children's Defense Fund. Can you tell us what it is and why it was created?" CDF, Marion said, is an attempt to create a viable, long-range institution to bring about reforms for children. If they are to receive fair treatment and recognition in this country, children require the same kind of planned, systematic, and sustained advocacy, legal and otherwise, that the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund instigated for blacks 3 decades or more ago. And we heard about that from Elaine so eloquently. That also resonated in the early days of Juvenile Law Center, where we saw ourselves as building on the civil rights movement. Marion in 1974 went further, identifying half a dozen issues that she would pursue from the outset, including exclusion of children from school and reform of the juvenile justice system. Marion's issues, as was so often the case, would become juvenile law centers. I was also excited to see the word fund appear in CDF's name, only to be disappointed, Elaine, when I learned that CDF wasn't a funding source after all. In the years that followed, Marion built a political powerhouse. She did it with a stellar CDF staff, many of whom are here tonight. She did it by finding strategic allies, by building coalitions, by mobilizing parents and advocates, interested citizens, people of faith, and people who had faith in children. Marion CDF was a force on Capitol Hill. As a young lawyer in the early 1980s, I was excited when CDF asked me to testify about reducing the use of foster care before Tom Downey's House Ways and Means subcommittee. CDF gave me my first taste of testifying in Congress. Marion and her staff knew how to build a record that a progressive Congress could use. Marion also helped folks like me gain our place in the world of child advocacy. She wasn't worried about turf. Marion wanted results, and she was happy to bring a callow advocate like me along as long as I advanced the cause. In 1992, Marion published a book, The Measure of Our Success, a letter to my children and yours. It's a slender, wise volume. I got my copy at one of the annual national conferences that Marion convened to mobilize her people. In this book, Marion wrote that she learned from her parents that service is the rent we pay for living. She wrote that in her family there was no talk of burnout. In The Measure of Our Success, Marion also observed that it, quote, does not take character, intellect, or talent to inherit $1 million or to be born white or male. One of Peter and Marion's amazing sons, Jonah, wrote the foreword to The Measure of Our Success. Jonah wrote that his mother was, quote, probably one of the most honest people in the world. Indeed, honesty is one of Marion's many virtues. In modern jargon, one associates Marion's brand with honesty, excellence, intellect, passion, justice. It was no accident that Juvenile Law Center asked Marion to sit in 2000 for our 25th anniversary video. We knew that Marion's presence alone would reflect well on us. She shared her brand. I can tell you that I was deeply moved when I heard Marion talk. If Marian Wright Edelman was saying good things about Juvenile Law Center and me, well, maybe we really were making a difference in the world. In 2014, on the anniversary of the 1974 Educational Review and CDF's founding, Harvard's Graduate School of Education brought Marian together with practitioners and scholars. We reflected on topics dear to Marian, a list of CDF's greatest hits: prenatal and infant health, early childhood care, school reform, vulnerable children, child poverty. I was there as a juvenile justice practitioner. The symposium glimpsed back, but in keeping with Marian's way of looking at things, it was largely devoted to the future. Participants took ideas that were once revolutionary, ideas like Head Start, or a youth's entitlement to due process when charged with a crime, and showed how we could make them better, comprehensive, permanent. The symposium produced a book, the third that I'm citing tonight to capture the arc of Marian's time at CDF. It is called Improving the Odds for America's Children: Future Directions in Policy and Practice. Marian wrote The Afterward, an ironic title for an essay about the years to come. As we look toward the future, Marian wrote, CDF remains steadily focused on helping catalyze and mount the transforming nonviolent social justice movement for children our nation desperately needs, and on pursuing justice for children and the poor with urgency and persistence. Urgency and persistence. In today's high-tech world, there are very few people who can pursue anything for more than a few minutes with urgency and persistence. Marian has done it for decades. In her 1992 book, The Measure of Our Success, Marian told a story about Sojourner Truth. Quote, one day during an anti-slavery speech, she was heckled by an old man. Old woman, do you think that your talk about slavery does any good? Why, I don't care any more for your talk than I do for the bite of a flea. Perhaps not, Sojourner Truth replied, but the Lord willing, I'll keep you scratching. A few years ago, Juvenile Law Center had a small DC event to honor Marian and Peter. Marian, I noticed, as Jim Weil mentioned, wore a Sojourner Truth medal around her neck. Marian is Sojourner Truth's heir. Marian is in a line of persistent advocates who have made their mission the improvement of other people's lives. If I had a book to sign for Marian today, I would inscribe it the way she did in my copy of The Measure of Our Success. I would write, to Marian, with love and deep gratitude for all you do for children.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce Sarah Rosenbaum. Ms. Rosenbaum is currently the Harold and Jane Hirsch Professor of Health Law and Policy at George Washington University School of Public Health and Health Services. She also holds professorships in both the university's School of Law and its School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Professor Rosenbaum.
Well, it's an incredible honor to be here. And everybody who's spoken before me has given you sort of a wonderful, soaring vision of Marian. So given the hour and that I'm the second to the last speaker, I'm going to tell you two stories. So the first story, which I didn't put in my written remarks, it tells you about Marian as a person. And the second story tells you about Marian as a leader. So the Marian as a person story goes like this. It was the end of the summer, 1980. CHAP, which nobody in this room except probably Marian remembers, which was the Carter administration's failed Medicaid expansion initiative, was going down the tubes. And I had a new baby. And it was too early to put her into childcare. She went off to a great childcare center, but they weren't ready to take her till she was 60 days old. So unable to just sort of stay at home, especially since in those days there was no electronic connection to anything. I, had to go to work, and I couldn't bear to stay away because we were losing this Medicaid expansion, and here I had a baby, and this expansion was all about babies. So I would bring the baby to work, and I was one of the most loving but incompetent mothers. I just couldn't figure out how to get my baby to go to sleep. And one afternoon, she was in the cradle screaming, and my office was a couple of floors above Marion's. And Marion came upstairs for some reason and discovered this screaming baby and said, "You clearly don't know what you're doing." So she took the baby, and about 40 minutes later, I went down to her office on the second floor. I then sort of curious, and her door was closed. She had gone off somewhere. The door was closed, and there was a screaming baby inside. I could hear my baby screaming. And there was a sign on the door that said, "Quiet baby sleeping." She had a real knack for sort of teaching you that at some point when your baby was really tired, and sooner or later the baby went to sleep, and I came back an hour or so later and she'd had a nap. But she was a most wonderful friend. And just a wonderful human being. And I think that all of the incredible imagery of Marion for all that she has accomplished in life, that to me is the most meaningful part of Marion, just what really a wonderful person she is. So now here's my story about working with Marion. Working with her, obviously, was being really a little part of history, which we appreciated at the time when we were going through it, although most of us who worked at the Children's Defense Fund, we were all little kids, and so we didn't quite appreciate what we were given, the honor we were given when we were going through it, but we had a good sense. And what we understood was that CDF was, as many people have said now, about altering the course of events for children in many different areas. And the thing that was so incredible about CDF was that we could see, even if none of us saw the whole, that Marion had sort of designed a mosaic in her head for children, and then she'd gone and built this fantastic organization that was going to make the mosaic come into life. And over the course of CDF's existence, as so many people have alluded to now, the impact that it's had is really incalculable. But our global, the global presence became evident to all of us, I think, in 1981. So it was 1981, it was January of 1981. President Reagan, of course, had just taken office. The Carter administration was history. All of the initiatives were toast. But more important than being toast, of course, we were on the verge of losing everything. We had achieved a lot of victories at that point, although child health policy reforms had eluded us, and that was the area I worked in. And then suddenly we were facing David Stockman and his Black Book, which I'm sure many people in this room remember. I don't think it's possible to convey just how frightening that was. I mean, he was a brilliant man. He had assembled this book, this Black Book. He was walking all around Washington with lists of programs that would go away. Everybody was essentially in despair. But Marion, of course, wasted no time on despair. She announced, and this is the way Marion was, she announced that we would have our own Black Book. He had a Black Book, we'll have a Black Book. And that Black Book would reintroduce poor children to lawmakers, in case they had forgotten about poor children. It would explain the programs that poor children depended on, and why and how the choices that they were about to make would matter so much to children and their families and ultimately to the nation. The book would do more than just argue against the cuts, and this was, I think, to me, core to Marion's brilliance. We were not, and you see a lot of this today, we were not just fighting about the cuts. Marion insisted that every chapter lay out the things that had to be done for children. You know, we all sort of scratched our heads, thinking we're barely holding on to what we've got, but every chapter had to have a positive agenda as well as arguments against the cuts. And putting that book together was an unbelievable experience. So basically, we were all assembled in this rambling building that we inhabited. There were rats in the basement. Marion had this wonderful office on the second floor. And the rest of us sort of sat in these cubbies. And we were given a few days, basically, to put this thing together. We all went off. We all compiled facts. We were called downstairs to the second floor to give Marion factoids. The more common thing was that her wonderful assistant, Beverly, would come upstairs with notes. And the notes would say, you know, can you get me X or Y? And the notes were totally unintelligible. You couldn't read anything Marion wrote down. And you'd sit there and puzzle over these notes, you know, just bewildered. We'd sort of make our way through. And this book came together. It came together in great part because CDF had many subject area experts in various fields who knew their stuff really well, whether it was education or childcare or healthcare or whatever. And we had Jim, who was absolutely brilliant and who, as you could hear tonight, sort of would pull us all together and help with the big picture. And then there was, of course, the genius Paul Smith, who just, you cannot imagine the reams of statistics he made come out of his hat at a time when I think he must have done them with a slide rule. I mean, you know, we had no equipment. It just, life wasn't like that. And what ultimately emerged from all of this was really quite a path-breaking document. It was produced in record time. Marion told me tonight that everything is scanned in electronically, so I have to go and see if it still exists, the first black book. And it was black. It was this horrible Xerox job. It had our boat on it. And this thing was Sacco from the moment it hit. I mean, I have people today, I've been practicing now for about 43 years. I have people today who I worked with way back at CDF who come up to me and talk still about the Black Book. What a watershed it was. It was short. Our books then got much longer and more involved and had lots of tables, and Marion would think of more tables that she wanted. It had an incredible impact, and the impact was not just the agenda it laid out and the arguments against the cuts. It was a moment when suddenly things turned a little. There was a horribly long way to go, and we ended up losing a fair amount of ground in the 80s. We gained a lot of ground, but we lost a lot of ground. But you could feel the sigh of relief when that book appeared, that there was a way to fight back, and you could fight back effectively and mitigate damage and even make some gains. And by the mid-'80s, we were making many gains. Things got lost, but other things got found. I know our child health work the best because that's what I did at CDF. And it is difficult to overstate the contribution Marion made to child health policy. It was a long time coming. The 70s were a time of great research and effort, and nothing went anywhere. And her great contribution was not only spearheading the effort to take the Medicaid program, which once covered about 10 million children, and today pays for half of all the births in the United States, and covers 40% of all children, not poor children, all children. Although that tells you how poor children are today. But not just the vision of turning Medicaid into true public insurance, which it has become, but being able to navigate two unbelievable political perils. One was the eternal peril of Medicaid. Medicaid is always, on the verge of blowing up. It's the biggest program, and there was the problem of navigating budgets and being able to put an argument together that would get us through the budgeting process so that we could move this legislation. But the other and much more serious problem, which of course is with us to this day, is the problem of Medicaid and abortion. From the time that Roe v. Wade was decided, of course, Medicaid has been in the crosshairs of American law as one of the great vehicles for essentially eliminating the means by which women would secure a fundamental right. And she was able to navigate this. She was able to navigate between what was, of course, the terrible, desperate need to fight back against the stripping away of women's access to essential services, but the need to allow advances for women because of the pregnancy and postpartum and ultimately preventive services gains that we could make with Medicaid expansion and children. And it was not possible under the Carter administration to move the Medicaid legislation because it was hobbled by abortion writers. And Marion, more than anybody else in her special relationship with Henry Hyde, made that possible. It was something that I appreciated greatly as we went through it, but came to appreciate even more deeply as the years have gone by, just what it took to navigate our way through that, what could only be sort of Scylla and Charybdis cubed. It took 25 years to complete the Medicaid expansion cycle and to add CHIP, of course, later on as a companion program. But the amazing thing is that these advances have proved to be unbelievably durable. It is now a given that children in the United States should not be without health insurance. I mean, it is, I cannot tell you in my lifetime, I'm 68 almost, so it's a rather short period of time. In my lifetime as a lawyer, we have gone from it's perfectly acceptable for millions of children not to be insured to every child is insured, of course. And based on those advances, of course, we built the great advances of the Affordable Care Act and public insurance for all Americans. And so really, Marion deserves the thanks not just of children, but of all Americans.
Thank you very much. And our final dedicator this evening is Professor Marty Guggenheim. Marty is the Fiorello LaGuardia Professor of Clinical Law here at NYU. He has co-directed our Family Defense Clinic since 1973. Has been a real leader of our faculty for decades now, and was also a student here at NYU Law. Marty.
It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. I'm embarrassed to acknowledge the truth that I've never met Marian Wright Edelman personally until today. I've never quite understood how that could be true since I've dedicated my life to children's rights, and I've worked very closely with her husband, Peter, for many years, but I think Catherine and the editors assumed we knew each other, but I was more than thrilled to be asked to say some words to honor your remarkable career. This is always a very special event at the law school. Annual survey's yearly dedication invariably chooses an eminently worthy person. And as amazing as each of them is, they feel honored to be associated with the brilliant men and women that are on this distinguished list. And reviewing just some of the individuals who have been honored before gives you a sense of what I mean. William Brennan, Thurgood Marshall, Harry Blackmun, John Paul Stevens, Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Sonia Sotomayor, Hillary Clinton, Janet Reno, Ronald Dworkin, Anthony Amsterdam, Lawrence Tribe, Desmond Tutu, just some of the names. You may have noticed a decided preference for important judges and brilliant legal scholars, along with a nod to public officials, but no one before has lived the life of public service. I can't call you Marion, I'm sorry. I'll call you Dr. Edelman because you're honorary, 103 honorary degrees. By the way, how many of us, when we Google our names, can find the title, Top 25 Quotes by Marion Wright Edelman? She can. And one of the sites says, of 173. But we honor you outside of the academy, the courthouse, or as a public official. You're unique, and I am so proud of the annual survey for recognizing how special you are and what you mean to this country. What you did was create the most important NGO of its kind in the world. You set out to change how we treat children with a strong commitment to improving the lives of the least important people in this country. And that's not children, that's poor children of color. That's been your compass of true north, and I know no one who has walked that walk with the integrity and commitment and vision and brilliance that compares to you and to what you've accomplished. The sad truth about the United States is that it is both the richest country in the world and ranks at the very bottom in sharing its wealth with children. And one of your methods, which I've always so appreciated, is your shaming effort of America. Because when I'm feeling blue, I consult the CDF website, and I get to read the truth about our country, spoken in a voice of clarity that is unique. And I asked the students in the room who mean to honor Marion Wright Edelman's life to consult that website this week and learn things about this country that you may not know, but that it is important that you learn. The shaming includes an annual report that ranks each state in terms of child poverty. There's a chart of children living in extreme poverty, a chart of children under 6. There's a chart of children living in poverty by race. Consider this. In only 4 states in the country is the percentage of black children living in poverty below 20. In 10 states, the percentage of black children living in poverty is greater than 40%. Ranging as high as 75% in Idaho. The charts are broken down by race, including white non-Hispanic children. In Ohio, 55% of black children under 6 live in poverty. If you don't know that, it's because you haven't followed the work of Marian Wright Edelman. She screams this out daily, but few of us are aware of it, or too few of us are aware of it. 40% of Hispanic children in Ohio live in poverty. I could go on, but I won't, given the hour, to talk about the truths that Marian Wright Edelman speaks daily through her website and through the work. The list of things that CDF has accomplished is remarkably long. The list of things it needs to accomplish is considerably longer. And I know there's nobody in this room who believes that and understands that more than you. It's what makes you so special. You know you're not special. You're wrong, but you know that. Here are some of her quotes. "I'm sure I'm impatient sometimes. I sure do get angry. I think it's outrageous how hard it is to get this country to feed its children and to take care of its children and to give them a decent education. We have the capacity to make sure that every mother has prenatal care, yet we don't do it. What is it about America? It says we don't value children and families. We're hypocrites. Child poverty and neglect, racial disparities in systems that serve children, and the cradle to prison pipeline are not acts of God. They are America's immoral, political, and economic choices that can and must be changed with strong political, corporate, and community leadership. Those are the focus and crucial ideas of Marian Wright Edelman, and that's why you're my hero. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Mrs. Edelman and Dean Morrison to the stage now. Mrs. Edelman, on behalf of the New York University Annual Survey of American Law, I would like to dedicate the 76th volume to you in honor of your contributions to American law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right here for one quick picture.
One photo.
I'm not sure I recognize who all you all have been talking about tonight. I feel like the luckiest person in the world to have been born at the intersection of great events and great people and great role models. And everything I do today comes out of my childhood. I had great parents and community co-parents, and I've always had something to fight about and to be against and to be for. And my daddy and mama said that God runs a full employment economy, and that if you just follow the need, you'll never lack for a cause worth living and dying for. And so I do exactly what my parents and my community co-parents and all the great role models of the time. They drug me out everywhere to listen to the Howard Thurmans, to the Mordecai Johnsons, to the Mary McLeod Bethunes, it was always clear that God did not make two classes of children. And I was a rebel from the time I was 4 or 5, okay? I went up to Bell's department store with my Sunday school teacher, and I didn't know the difference between white and black water. I drank out of the white water fountain. She jerked me away in terror, and I sort of said, "What's the matter?" And I took great pleasure in going to switch the signs wherever I saw them all over, and got great satisfaction from that. But I guess I always sort of, every issue that the Children's Defense Fund works on came out of my childhood. And I don't want to see that continue in this nation. But before I do that, nobody builds an institution alone. Nobody builds a movement alone. And one of my prayers from the beginning has been, send me who you want, God, to do what you need to have done. And boy, did he send me some gifted friends and gifted people. And I have always felt very blessed to have been at the intersection of great events and great role models. And it's miraculous. I mean, I've heard Miss Bethune when I was 7 say, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. I'd never heard a woman command a group of men that way. I used to have to go every year to the Columbia, South Carolina auditorium and sit on hard folding seats for 4.5 hours where Mordecai Johnson, the president of Howard, would speak with an intermission, and we would groan. Dr. Benjamin E. Mays had to come and stay with us because there were no public accommodations for the people who traveled, but I was always exposed to great role models. But the model was, you don't like the way the world is, you change it. And I can cite every issue that the Children's Defense Fund relates to now, today, to something that happened. I can't stand seeing a child excluded from anything that any other child has access to, and every child is sacred, and that was just built in. A migrant family there was a big accident in front of our church, which was on a highway, and the ambulance came and found that the white truck driver who had hit the migrant car was not wounded, and drove away and left the people who were lying on the highway, the black migrant workers, laying there without help. Little Johnny Herron, who lived 2 houses down from me, with his grandma Ruth, died because he stepped on a nail, and tetanus shots were not available back then, and I am obsessed with immunization of children. We didn't have decent recreation, but my parents built a playground behind the church. If you see something needs to be done, it's not out there, you do it for yourself, and then you help others. But we didn't have a lot of recreation. We built a playground behind the church, but then my playmate around the corner jumped off the bridge into the local creek, which was right down the road, and broke his neck and died. But then we learned later as I grew up that the creek was the outlet for the hospital sewage. And we got hand-me-down books from the white schools, but we always had books in our house before we had a second pair of shoes. And when old man Reddick got what I now know as Alzheimer's, I began to wander the streets. My parents began a home for the aged across the street, and all of us children had to cook and clean. We didn't like it at the time, not one bit, but that's how we learned that everybody was our neighbor. And we caught our mother, had to close her down. We still have a home for the aged. Everything my mother and father taught, still is there. And my nieces, grandnieces, carry on the home for the aged. The church is still there. But I learned the importance of not asking why doesn't somebody do something about an injustice, that you ask what I can do. And so I grew up with this community of parents and co-parents who believed in God and said that God ran a full employment economy. And if you just followed the needs, you'd never lack for meaning in life. And that has certainly been true. So when people say, why do you do what you do? I say, I do exactly what my parents and my co-parents did and my grandparents did. And it wouldn't occur to me not to do that. And when I went to Mississippi, boy, you talk about courage. You would file your little LDF school desegregation case, and the next day, 20 names were tacked up on the telegram posts, and they were evicted from their houses and shot at, but they wanted the children to have a better life and to be able to go to school. I've never seen such courage. And I tell you, I mean, every time I thought I was just scared or couldn't do this, Miss Haymanos would get me up at 3 in the morning, and Miss Maybertha Carter would get me up. I've never seen such courage, and I've always wanted to be half as good as those people of grit. And everything my mother and father started, whether it's the Home for the Aged I have 12 foster sisters and brothers. I would wake up and I would have another child in my bedroom. So I just do what my parents did. It never occurred to me. And so I feel so lucky to have been born who I was, where I was, with the parents and community co-parents who built a cocoon around us, who taught us history. We had oratorical contests, and we're going to put oratorical contests in our freedom schools. I mean, I can repeat Ralph Bunche's 1946 speech at Fisk University about the barriers of race can be surmounted. But we need to create the world we want. And I had empowering parents throughout and great faith. And I went for years and years in our church vestibule where my daddy, he always had books. We always had books in our house. We didn't have a second pair of shoes. We always had books. And I'm going to put it in this year's report that we're going to put out in the next month. But there, in Herb Block, we did a cartoon that was very close to that. But every day in my formative years, until I was 14 or 15, I would walk into the church vestibule, and there was this picture. Newspaper editorial, a cartoon. It wasn't a cartoon, whatever you call it, whatever Herb Block does and people like that. But there was this picture of a Thanksgiving occasion, and hordes of brown, sunken-jawed people, hungry, starving, and a table laden with unbelievable amount of food, and turkeys and hams, and a white family sitting there, and they said, the caption was, "Shall we say grace?" And those kind of things kind of sear in a child's mind, but the message, again, is when you see something needs to be done, don't ask why somebody doesn't do something, you ask why you don't do something. And God runs a full employment economy. So when I do today what my parents and community co-parents did, what those incredibly courageous people in Mississippi did because they wanted their children to have a better life. I had the best education in the world at the Legal Defense Fund, which is the spawn and inspiration for the Children's Defense Fund, and who, I wouldn't do anything else. And I always try to make sure that the baby sits in the middle of the table when policy discussions are being had. And if the policy is going to hurt that child or not help that child or not be just for that child, then you fight it. And so God does run a full employment economy. And if you just stick with it, you can make things happen. And we've got a long way to go. We're going to end child poverty in this country. It's obscene. We're going to break up that cradle-to-prison pipeline. We're going to either do it or we're going to continue to slide backwards. But I think it's the Achilles heel of this nation, and I think it's the most important work. But I just feel so blessed to have had the chance to make a difference with such extraordinary talents. One of my prayers has been, Lord, send me who we need to do what you want. And he has sent me this bountiful, gifted group of folk. And one I want to just single out tonight again, Paul Smith, who was our genius research director, who never gave me a bad fact. He never gave me a wrong fact, and who could just make the most complicated thing so simple. And he looked like Einstein. His budget never increased 1 penny in the 30 years he worked with us. But he was indispensable, important. And who's not sitting here is Mary Lee Allen, because she's taking care of business with our policy director now. But these great, gifted people whom you have heard, nobody builds an institution by themselves. Elaine, thank you. So I just have felt so blessed. And I just want to just end with a prayer because it comes out of I'm a praying lady. And it's by a white journalist down in Tennessee named Anna Hughes, but I think it captures what we need to be doing in this country because it's our Achilles heel. We're never going to be a great nation. We're never going to be a moral nation unless we create a decent chance to succeed in a level, fair, just playing field for every child. And she says we pray for, and I say we will fight for and advocate for children who sneak popsicles before supper, who erase holes in math note workbooks and can never find their shoes, but we've got to pray and stand up and fight for children who stare at photographers behind barbed wire, and it's unbelievable what is going on in this country now with this wall and this biblical evil, and we are just simply going to have to decide we're not going backwards. We're not. We're just not. Who can't bound down the street in a new pair of sneakers, who never counted potatoes, who were born in places we wouldn't be caught dead, who never go to the circus, and who live in an X-rated world. Let's commit to praying and standing and fighting and voting for children who bring us sticky kisses and fistfuls of dandelions, who hug us in a hurry, who get their lunch money. And let's pray and stand and fight and advocate for children who never get dessert, who never have a safe blanket to drag behind them, who watch their parents watch them die, who can't find any bread to steal, who don't have any rooms to clean up, whose pictures aren't on anybody's dresser, and whose monsters are real. Let's pray and advocate for children who spend all of their allowance before Tuesday, throw tantrums in the grocery store, and pick at their food, who like gross stories, who shove dirty clothes under the bed and never rinse out the tub. But let's also stand up and fight for children who don't like to be kissed in front of the carpool, but children who never get a visit from the tooth fairy, who squirm in church we like, but temple and scream in the phone. But we also must make sure that we stand up and pray and laugh with children and make them smile when those children have things that only make them cry. Let's pray and accept responsibility for children whose nightmares come in the daytime, who will eat anything, who've never seen a dentist, who aren't spoiled by anybody, who go to bed hungry and cry themselves to sleep, who live and move and have no being. We pray for children who want to be carried, and for children who must be carried, for children we never give up on, who are our own, and for children who never get a second chance. Let's pray for those children we smother, but also those children who will grab the hand of anyone kind enough to offer it. You know, this is the Achilles heel, both morally and economically. Who lets preschool children be killed by guns more frequently than law enforcement officers in the line of business? What kind of nation does this? And so I think that there's never been something that is not worth living and dying for, and the cause for children and the cause for racial justice and the cause for economic justice. And I just, it's been a privilege to carry on the tradition of the people who taught me that your faith is something you live, and that, God does not make two distinctions between children. And so thank you for this honor. Thank you, young people.
Well, thank all of you. As Marty said, Ms. Edelman, it is a storied list of dedicatees that you joined today, but really you bring honor to them, and you bring honor to our school too, so thank you. And congratulations and thank you to the students of the annual survey for making a spectacular choice. You've done us proud, and Ms. Edelman, you've done us a great honor in joining us here today. So thank you all for being with us. I hope you'll join us for a reception here and continue celebrating. Thank you.